Well, Jeff, if you're ready, why don't we go ahead and get started?
Sounds good.
Okay. See if we can get the slides moving. There we go. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for spending some time with us today. I'm Clay Hildebrand, President of Psychological Associates, and I'll serve as the moderator for today's discussion. I have with me two of my colleagues, Jill Porter and Jeff Lefton. They'll be helping me manage the chat function where you can submit questions, and they're running two poll questions that we'll get to a little bit later. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded in the event you want to revisit the information or share it with others. Our topic is Leading in Crisis, People Skills for Challenging Times, a very relevant subject currently and something I know many of us are dealing with. We have three great speakers on today's panel, and I'd like to introduce them to you. I apologize for the delay on the slides, Mike. I am locked up. Well, I'll get to that later. First up is Joe Castellano. Joe spent 26 years as an executive at Anheuser-Busch, where he ran 6 business units. He started with AB in sports marketing in 1983, directing that group for 5 years. From there, he went on to become Vice President of Consumer Awareness and Education, working to promote responsible drinking and fighting alcohol abuse. In 1994, he was named Vice President of Wholesale Operations, overseeing 13 beer distributorships and 2,300 employees. Other positions included Vice President of Retail Marketing and Corporate Human Affairs. Joe was the Chief Information Officer when AB was acquired by InBev in 2008. A graduate of Northwestern University with a degree in journalism, Joe has also served on several charity and civic boards, including the St. Patrick's Center, the St. Louis Regional Chamber, the Make-A-Wish Foundation of Missouri, and the American Red Cross of Greater St. Louis. Today, Joe is a business advisor serving privately held companies and a career coach for executives and students. He is also an author publishing a personal memoir entitled Bull in the Ring, Football and Faith, Refuge in a Troubled Time. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you.
Our next guest is Maxine Clark. Maxine is one of the true innovators in the retail industry. In 1997, she founded Build-A-Bear Workshop, a teddy bear themed retail entertainment experience. Over the years, both Build-A-Bear and Maxine have been recognized by the world of retail. They were named Hottest Retailers of 2004 and Portfolio Company of the Year in 2005. In 2008, Maxine was named one of the 25 most influential people in retailing. And in 2018, Build-A-Bear was named by Fortune as one of the best companies to work for the 10th year in a row. In 2013, Maxine stepped down from her role as Chief Executive Bear to apply her entrepreneurial skills to her passion for improving public education. She is committed to creating more access for families and students to systems and support to enrich each child's learning experience. In addition to her seat on the Build-A-Bear board, Maxine has served on the board of Foot Locker, Teach for America, Parents as Teachers, and Bard's Jewish Hospital, just to name a few. A graduate of the University of Georgia, she holds an honorary Doctor of Law degree from St. Louis University and a Doctor of Humane Letters and Education from the University of Missouri St. Louis. Also an author, in 2006, she published her first book, The Bare Necessities of Business, Building a Company with Heart. Welcome, Maxine. And next we have Bill McNamara. Bill has over 30 years of retail experience with 2 prominent department stores, Macy's and the May Company. He began his career at Filene's, a division of May department stores, rising through the ranks of the merchandising organization. In 1998, he was promoted to president of the May Merchandising Company to lead all brand merchandising and product development. 2 years later, Bill was promoted to vice chairman of May Department Stores, where he had direct responsibility for all of its department store divisions. In 2005, upon completion of the merger between Federated and May, he became chairman and chief executive officer of the company's Midwest division. Bill then became president of Macy's Reinvent Strategies and served in that capacity until his retirement in 2009. Today, Bill serves on the board of Burlington, leveraging his long career in retail and broad experience in large retail change management, including merchandising and product development. Welcome, Bill, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Clay. Good to be with you.
If I could get my slides to work, you would see a little bit more, so bear with me 1 second. Try it that way. So today I'm going to start by asking each of our speakers to spend about 2 minutes each sharing with us the crisis or challenge situation they plan to discuss today. We'll then have about 30 minutes to dig deeper into each of those situations, followed by Q&A. Remember, you can submit your questions through the chat function. And at the end, I'll ask each of our panelists to give us what we're referring to as their golden nugget, that one piece of wisdom they want everyone to take away from this discussion. But first, let's ask the audience a question. With help from my colleagues, we'll put up our first poll question. So the first thing we're asking is, how well are your organization's leaders doing at leading through the crisis? The options are great job, good job, okay job, poor job, an awful job. So we'll give everybody about 60 seconds to make a choice. We'll share with everybody how that came out, and then we'll dive right into our presentation. Curious if our panelists have any thoughts on how this may pan out, or if you'll be surprised by the answer. Maxine, any thoughts on where this might go?
I think that, most people will probably, I would feel like say good job, not necessarily a great job, because we don't have enough knowledge, consistent knowledge across the country to help us do a great job, but we could be doing a great job. I think it's good, okay to good, because of just lack of collaboration on the local, state, and national level to give people adequate information.
Joe, what does your experience tell you?
Well, I just to cheat a little bit, I saw some Gallup work on it. It was a little less than optimistic. There was a data saying it was maybe a third of the people thought their leadership, not necessarily on this COVID situation, but just overall was okay. It was less than ideal.
How about you, Bill?
I'd be in the same slot as Maxine. I think on the virus in particular that it'll be in the good range, because it just seems from what we see in the press that the majority of Americans have a pretty positive attitude about things. Even the demonstrations that I've seen around the country seem to be small numbers of people.
Jeff, are you able to share with us those results? Here we go. So interestingly, we do have a pretty optimistic group right now. It looks like 39% said great job, followed by closely good job at 35%, okay at 23%. Fortunately, only 3% said poor, and we didn't get any awfuls. So I guess all things considered, that's not too bad.
Great.
So why don't we go ahead and just dive into the topic? And Maxine, can you tell us a little bit about the situation you're going to use here today?
Well, I think I've lived long enough in this business world to have lived through quite a few of these. And each time you live through one, the next one is a little bit more manageable. They happen all the time, and they happen at different levels. When we were a little company, it seemed like the one thing that happened was big. But I would like to maybe talk about when the recession occurred and how we, in 2008 and 9, and how we sort of stumbled along because we didn't want to believe it was lasting, and we wanted to make sure, we thought business would come. It was in the fourth quarter. And so I think I could have, in retrospect, I would have done it differently with all that I know today.
Thank you. Bill, how about yourself?
I was a vice chairman of May, to try to clarify things, at the time that the merger occurred with Macy's. And while it was called a merger, it truly was an acquisition. And it was explained to us, the senior management of May, that this was not going to be a merger of equals. In other words, it was an acquisition. And May and Macy's had, over a period of years, approached each other about the two organizations getting together. And this time it was more impactful. And Macy's at the point in time had a very good strategy to create a national department store chain, and to be able to leverage the advertising and the parade and the July 4th fireworks in New York and things like that. So they wanted to become national, and they came at us and acquired us. And so one of that brings it to the top of my mind for this crisis or challenge discussion today, because immediately one of my first thoughts was that a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. And think about the unemployment we have today, that was certainly small potatoes. And my second thought was that people are going to be afraid of something. People are going to have a lot of fear, and we need to go about trying to deal with those two issues and many others.
And Joe, how about yourself?
Well, Bill just said the key word to me, fear. To me, I see a crisis in an organization, which is when your employees, when your people have a fear of their own safety or of their livelihood, their life or their livelihood. And so I thought of an example in a narrower way, I guess. It was in the late summer of 1994. I had just taken over our company's wholesale distribution operation. It was about $1 billion in sales, and it was we had a P&L responsibility. We had operations all over the country. And August Busch III and Pat Stokes promoted me to this job. And one of the first things August said to me as he was sticking a finger into my chest, he said, "You're going to have to fix the Teamster contract in Boston." And I thought, okay, let me find out what that means. I had no labor relations experience. So I quickly learned that we had an awful contract full of restrictions that was creating competitive disadvantages for us. It had happened over the years because business was good and we wanted labor peace. But the context was there were two things going on for Anheuser-Busch at the time. One was that we had our national Teamsters contract at our breweries with much more at stake. And August wanted to make sure we didn't have any bad contracts out there before we went into what was going to be a tough negotiation with the national Teamsters. The other thing, you'll probably remember in 1994, Major League Baseball was in an awful management labor situation. The players went on strike thinking it would be a short episode. The owners held out, closed the season down in 1994, I guess it was. And so there was a lot of issues going on there. And I quickly learned that this was a tough situation. It was a tough labor local, the Teamsters up there in Boston. Our employees up there were fearful for their safety. Our general manager up there got a remote car starter before I even knew what that was. And a lot of our employees were fearful about losing their job. So that was the first, that was one that I thought could relate to today. Nothing I did in 26 years compares to what's going on for leaders today with this COVID-19 crisis. My heart goes out to them. But a lot of the things that we did, I think there are lessons learned that can be applied today.
Well, good. I like that we've got three separate scenarios that have some overlap, but they certainly are unique as well. Maxine, you referenced in your example the recession prior and obviously some comparisons to what's going on today. Tell us a little bit more about what you saw coming last time and how you reacted.
Well, the recession, we could see it at Build-A-Bear probably earlier than a lot of other people because families restrict their purchasing pretty quickly. And it actually started in 2007 when the gas prices started to escalate and people made less trips to the mall. We could see that pretty quickly. This was also behind the scenes. The web was becoming a much bigger part of people's lives. So they had an alternative for many of the things that they would have bought at the mall. They could buy at home. They couldn't do Build-A-Bear at the mall. And so we felt that was our wonderful opportunity that you had to come to the mall for Build-A-Bear. And so I kept thinking that business was going to get, it really was not terrible, but that it would get better, that it was getting towards Christmas. And I thought, we're going to pull this out. We've got great marketing. We've got great product. And while we came close, it really clearly wasn't the Christmas that we had wanted. And just all in that month of December, I was thinking we have to do something. We have to do something. And in January, when everybody was, the week between Christmas and New Year's, when everybody's on vacation, that's actually a really big Build-A-Bear week because kids come in with their gift cards. And it was clear to me that I had to make some changes and that I would have to cut staff. And this is a company, I was the founder and many of the people that I hired in the very beginning were all still working with me. So they were part of our creation of our company. It was really, really hard to do that. And so we came back and we made the hard decisions. And when I looked at it a few months later, I realized that I should have made those decisions earlier. You never want to do any of those things around Christmas. You talk to yourself about it, especially in the retail business, which Bill can relate to. It's always going to get better. There's always going to be a Christmas. And I realized that if I had done it earlier, it would have been much easier for those people to get jobs. That the longer I waited for what I thought was doing them a favor was really not a favor. And it certainly didn't make it any easier. It's never easy to decide to cut people. And while it was nothing compared to what companies are doing, especially in the retail business today, it was a big deal to me. And a big deal to us because we were a family. I mean, we really built a business like we were a family. And fortunately, we did everything we could. We had a solid plan in place for helping people find another job. We had severance pay. We had help with unemployment. We had a resume help. We had all those things, which did help them a lot. But I realized that, procrastination is never a good thing. And while Christmas comes, it may not come as big as you want it to. And that's just a lesson that I learned. And I can see that in other cases like that, it helped me make decisions faster about tough decisions, whatever it was, closing a store or deciding not to expand 10 stores instead, just do 5, whatever those decisions were. It was much easier to make them after I learned from that one experience.
Very good. Thank you. Bill, you used the word fear first, and you talked about that this was not so much a merger, but an acquisition. So how did you go about helping to communicate that message without creating greater concern?
Well, at the very beginning, we did not communicate that broadly. And I had been through a previous merger acquisition much earlier in my career. And when the leader of the company that acquired us explained to us that I was at Filene's in Boston, that we had joined the May company at that point in time. And I thought those were terrific words that were soothing to a lot of people and gave us a sense of pride, fulfillment, whatever, even though we were going through a change. So we were very, very cautious the pace of which we shared information like that, and went about other strategies and ideas to keep the buses and trains rolling and have people feel good about themselves doing their job, and really trying to give people an enhanced purpose for their role, and opportunities to succeed and shine in front of their new leaders with Macy's.
Very good. Thank you. And Joe, I can't help but think about the position you were in. You said this was something that you didn't have experience with. You were in uncharted territory, much like so many leaders are today, frankly. How did you even get yourself settled to where you felt like you could take this on?
I had probably an unwarranted self-confidence. But the uncertainty is what's really the most difficult thing for a leader. And you see throughout history, bad leadership decisions come from people kind of freezing up. Over my 26 years in Anheuser-Busch, there's probably a dozen times when you're in that crucible moment when you think history is being made or something's happening. And you have a little bit of a temptation to flee, but hey, this is my thing. I got to take responsibility for this. We got off to a start. We started negotiations, and it was rocky. And August came to me and said, "We're just going to sell that operation." And I said, "Hey, wait a minute. I just got started. You just gave me this challenge. Give me a chance." So he did, and I did. I had instincts on what to do. I did a lot of homework. First thing I studied the contract, talked to everybody who was involved in it, which is a message for all leaders. You really have to do the best you can, understanding you're never going to have enough information. You're never going to have it fast enough. Things are going to change. You have to evolve and adapt. I knew this wasn't me doing it. I had to recognize the team. We had a wonderful team in Boston, our management. There are employees there, our union employees there. We had a wonderful culture. We just had a very significant disagreement on how we were going to go about business. We had a phenomenal labor attorney in St. Louis, a high school classmate of mine, ironically, Eric Schmitz, who was the key guy in this. So I knew as the leader, I had to delegate and let people do what they were really good at. If you're fortunate in one of these situations, you have a good organization culture. We did. And you have guidelines and principles, and you just say, look, we're going to have to delegate. We're going to have to move fast. Let's you guys make decisions based on those guidelines and our culture. And we did. I also knew I had to be visible. They needed a leader. You have to show up. You have to establish authority. You have to let people know how this is going to go. You have to be calm. You can't panic. You can't be Pollyannish, but you have to be optimistic. You can't stand up there and say, I think the whole world is going to catch on fire. Nobody wants to be led by that. Importantly, you have to have stamina. And you have to have a plan, even if it's imprecise or not full. You have to have a plan. You have to be decisive. One thing I learned was that as you're waiting around to make a decision, a no decision is a decision. It sounds a little bit weird, but if you do nothing, that's a decision, and it's not usually a very good one. So we did things. We were always adapting, and we relentlessly communicated. That was really kind of the underpinning. We did, whenever we were visible, we knew we were kind of on a stage, we were being judged. Every word I said was being parsed and remembered and would be held to account on it. The easiest thing I did was just be honest, try to be authentic, sympathetic, compassionate. But we were relentless in our communication. We were there, we were present, saying, we're going to get through this. We're going to get through this.
Maxine, kind of picking up on that theme, you've been very candid in saying that you, having in hindsight, maybe would have done things faster, sooner, pulled the Band-Aid off a little bit quicker. But when you did have to start making those changes, what type of communications were you using, and were they effective, and how would you recommend people do that today?
Well, we did have a plan. I think the plan is really critical. When we knew that it was likely that we could do it. We just didn't. We were hoping Christmas, as I said, would come. It's kind of a good way to look at life, be optimistic. And we had a plan, and we had to execute that plan. And so we had all these details, all the communications out there. And even though it was a small part of the company, we were a small company, but it was 50 people. That was a lot of people to me. It's nothing like what's happening today in corporations, but it was 50 people that I could actually speak to and talk to and explain to. But I didn't have to do that as much as I thought. Number one, because people did understand. We had a good communication plan. Everybody walked with a packet of information on what to do next, on how to handle this transition for themselves. It was how they could land in a good place. And we really cared about that. That was very important to us, that we do everything possible, because we were not letting people go who did not do a good job or who didn't contribute to the company. And I think that calm, that when you feel calm and you are calm, people get that, and they feel less worried about themselves too. This will work out. This can move forward. And I think that's a really important point. And I think that what was just said by Joe about no decision is a decision. People they make up their own stories, and they fill in the blanks with their own words. And it's really difficult to make that happen when you're letting people make up their own story, their own narrative. And I think we're seeing that in today, that each state has to come up with their own plan. And here we live in St. Louis, and the city and the county, and we have to really, not everything's the same. And we have just over the river in Illinois, people could be operating their systems different, coming to work here, but living in Illinois. So it's very complicated. And without a plan, or at least a regional plan, people, they just flounder. And instead of using that energy that comes from crisis in a positive way, you end up using it in a negative way. And a plan really helps you turn, lemons into lemonade.
Bill, when things were changing there at your organization, do you feel like the plan was in place in time? Was it reactionary? And how did you go about handling that?
That was to me, Clay?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yes. So picking up on what Maxine just said to answer your question, is that back to the retail situation. So our merger acquisition was finalized, I believe, in the month of March. So we had 10 months of our fiscal year remaining, including the Christmas season that Maxine referred to accurately a couple of times. So we came up with an idea, and when I mentioned earlier about it, for people to have an enhanced purpose. And that was that, for those of you not from our local market, is when I talk about Macy's and May, Macy's and May were fierce rivals of each other. So it's baseball season. Think about Cardinals, Cubs, Red Sox, Yankees, Giants, Dodgers, that type of thing. So we got our organization to think about, we are going to beat Macy's for the balance of this year, because we were still going to operate as May, mostly independently with some supervision, for the balance of the merger year. And so the Beat Macy's, it kindled the competitive spirit of our team. And so the beat would be to have a greater increase in revenue and a greater increase in earnings than Macy's did. And it really, really worked. It kept people energized, whether they were in the merchandising area or they were the ones to face to the customers in the stores. And we streamlined our strategy and our activities, focused strictly on the short term. We enlisted the help of our suppliers, not all of who loved Macy's. And to the point Joe brought up, I believe it was, we just communicated over and over again, nonstop. We made ourselves very visible physically. We're very repetitive with the message and made it a real team effort and a us against them as far as getting results. And in a few minutes, whenever we'll talk about, we weren't 100% kill Macy's, but we had a strong competitive spirit.
Understood. Thank you. Joe, I'm going to take a question from the chat room and just kind of embellish it a tiny bit. The situation you found yourself in, I think, has some parallels to what we're doing today, and that is there's an emotional component to this. There is fear, like we talked about, but as we know, people can also experience anger and frustration and anxiety. And I know that oftentimes in a contractual situation, relationships can be very contentious. How did you handle that? Did you have to go to any outside sources, or how did you wade through that?
Well, we had great local leadership in Boston, and there was trust. Like in any organization, we had some bad guys that we one of the restrictions is we couldn't hire our own people. We had to take whoever the Teamsters Union Hall sent us. But over time, we had a lot of people that had been with us for a long time. And so our leadership up there knew those guys, knew their families. As I spent a lot of time up in Boston, I was delegating, of course, to the guys locally, but I got to know some of the key guys with the organization. And we found we had a lot more in common than we had at odds. I don't know how many Anheuser-Busch management people actually were in a union and actually had been on strike, but I was one of them. And so I had some empathy to what they were going through. I was able to talk in a language that understood their issues. But we had other people doing that as well. They understood, look, we're not doing this to make you upset. We're doing this. There's one, just to give you a quick example, we had ongoing communication meetings where people from our St. Louis organization would go to our local operations and get up in front of 100, 200, in the case of Boston, almost 300 people, and do a state of the company and so forth. Well, we had one scheduled for Boston, and I was being encouraged by some of my colleagues, well, we can't do that while we're having these labor issues. And I said, well, yeah, we're going to go do that. And we're going to invite them, and they're going to come into the organization, and we're going to talk about things. And so we made a little auditorium in the beer warehouse. And it got off to a little bit of a rocky start, but as I'm in there, we hired some outside security guys, and one of them says, okay, so if you feel threatened or you get in trouble, what signal do you want to use? I said, what are you talking about? He said, if you get in trouble, give me a signal and we'll move in. I said, how about I'm in trouble, move in. And it went off without an incident. I said, look, guys, I know we have this contentious labor negotiation, but I think we want the same things. We want a chance to do work that we're good at. We want to get compensated for it fairly. We want to work at a safe environment, and we want a future. We want the same things. We think the way the contract is right now is inhibiting our ability to have a good future for all of us. So I think there's the communication to diminish people's fear. What are my motives? Well, my motives are to have a bright future for all of us. And that was authentic, and it was something that we repeated relentlessly. And I think that served us well. One of the issues was, I don't think any of us these were 3-year contracts. They work without a contract. This took 6 years for us to resolve this issue. So one thing I see as a parallel today is the stamina. I just hope our leaders of our companies and our political leaders are going to be able to communicate to the American people. We need stamina here. This is going to take a really long time for things to be different for a long time. But we can do it if you're realistic and you're painting a picture of what is in store based on your best information and knowledge. We were able to do that, and I think that really helped diminish people's concern and their fear as they worked every day.
Maxine, you know, I read from your bio the history and the recognition Build-A-Bear and yourself received over years, and obviously post 2009 things were good. It was named, the company was named, you know, for 10 years in a row, best place to work. So how, after the crash was kind of recovering, how did you make that happen? And how did you bring people back in to feel comfortable and that they could trust the company?
Well, I learned well. My first career was with the Bay department stores, and the customer was always really important. And we kept the customer in front of us all the time. And since our customers are children and families, it was easy to stay up, to be upbeat, to be thinking about the future, new product development, new things that we were doing. We actually, during the recession, had a team meeting. While we weren't going to open up as many stores the next year as we had originally planned, we used that time to rethink our store design and to rethink the store. We called it the store of the future. What were we going to do differently? And so that when people came back to the mall to shop in droves, what were we going to be there for them? And that was very exhilarating. I think that I find that same thing now. You can be down in the dumps. You can be worried. There are a million things that are in the way that you can't control, but you can control how you think about the future and your own attitude. And I know that sounds trite, but I've been working with all these small companies that I consult with now, and every single call we've had 10 or 15 ideas for the future. And the future is tomorrow. It's not 10 years from now. It's not a long time away at all. What can we be doing now to build on that for tomorrow when the customer does come back? And some of them are impacted more than others. If they have storefronts, they're greatly impacted. But if they're direct-to-consumer online businesses, they've just been enjoying great rewards. They just can't get their product in fast enough. That's a whole nother story. So, in every single cycle, there are positive opportunities, and you have to look at those. And we always did at Build-A-Bear, because you can't, you're not going to dump these problems on the children that come in the door. You're just not. And they were always our beacon. What are we doing this for? Trying to encourage the imagination of children, and then that helped us tremendously. And we use the time productively, and I think that's an important attribute. To sit around and mope and what you can't do anything about doesn't help you. What is important, and I think a lot of people people are in different stages of their career. They're thinking about, I'm on furlough. Will I really have a job when will I really come back? That's a different problem. That's an individual problem. But I think also it's time, and I've been doing that a lot with college students that I mentor that just are graduating and had a job and now they don't. How do you rethink it? Was that the job you really wanted? Was that how can you turn this experience that you're having into more on your resume that shows how you've handled it? What else is possible for you? And I think that I'm an optimistic person by nature. Living in the retail business and the fashion business, there's always new cycles. There's always new products coming along. I feel like the best is still yet to come for America and for our companies, and for particularly here in St. Louis. I think we're well situated to benefit because of many, many things, the cost of living, where we're located, that we've come through this as a strong community. And there'll be a lot of reason for new businesses and new opportunities to develop here.
Thank you, Maxine. Bill, I have a question from the chat room for you specifically. It says, during the merger with Macy's, did they know about your competition mindset within May? And how did that impact things once the teams had to start kind of working together?
Great question. The answer is, I do not believe that they knew. And take that as an opportunity to shift gears to another thought. As I finished speaking before, I said it wasn't all just about beat Macy's, but it was for the part of us, but not me, of course. One of the other key thoughts that we immediately went after was to adapt Macy's. Is that Macy's was the winner, and the merger was going to happen no matter what, and to encourage our people to adapt Macy's, and we coached them in humility, listening, collaboration, asked them not to criticize, to volunteer help. Because what would happen is that if you were a dress buyer at Macy's, you immediately for those 10 months were working with the dress buyer at May and having phone conversations once a week or whatever. and trying to shepherd things through together. And a lot of, Maxine has certainly underscored this or signed up for, there are a lot of personalities that we come across in the quote so-called fashion business that have people with inflated egos. And Macy's is in New York. They're at Herald Square. They're right on 7th Avenue, the heart of the fashion industry and things like that. So they were not always the easiest people to deal with. But we were able to get a culture of accept Macy's and be humble and try to help. And remember that people like to be asked rather than told. So ask the Macy's people for their opinions, try to understand. And then so on this Adapt Macy's, we would just communicate nonstop over and over and over again. And the relationships between the two companies were not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but they were pretty good. They were good, not pretty good.
Joe, I want to come back to your kind of mantra about no decision is a decision. And one of the folks in the chat room is saying that today things are changing so quickly. And because so many of us are dealing with things that we've never dealt with before, what do you do? What is your advice when you just don't feel like you've got the information you need to move forward?
You don't have the perfect information. You don't have enough of it. You don't have it fast enough. But what do? You can't throw up your arms and do nothing. You can when you're in front of your employees or your colleagues, you have to have this presence. You have to convey confidence. When you're not up in front of them, you're working relentlessly. There's always one more thing you can do. You know, if you think back to World War II, Churchill, when England adopted the stay calm and carry on, and he was up leading the charge to the people of Great Britain, he was also on the telephone with FDR saying, "You guys got to help us here." And so you're negotiating things. You're looking for solutions in the current environment. You're looking for things to mitigate the symptoms of this virus. You're looking for ways to better contact trade. You're looking for anything that you can do to improve the situation, because you can never give up. You know, you can always, if you're defeated, if you're overwhelmed, okay. My approach was always, you got to go down fighting. You can always do something else. And if you've got the right organization, the right culture in our country, I certainly think we do, unleash the ingenuity of the American people. We're going to come up with solutions. We just got to get through the day. We got to get through the week. We got to keep people together. And I think that's what a job of a leader is, without really knowing, without really being certain what the future is.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, please.
I think that a lot of times as leaders and bosses, we feel like we have to have all the answers, and we don't. And most of the time we don't have them. And so our people do. Our customers have a lot of good ideas, our associates, and usually the frontline workers, the people that work in a store or work at the front line, they've been looking at this, and they just didn't, nobody asked them, so they didn't offer it up as an opportunity. And I would say that just one quick example of that here in St. Louis is parents right now are in a panic about summer programs for their kids. They've been sitting in front of computers, and our family foundation runs a program called Blueprint for Summer. And we can't decide for 9,000 camps what they're going to do. So we went out to the parents. We got a huge response that we'll be publishing next week. But parents had a lot of really good ideas on what St. Louis needs to do in order to pull together to make sure that we have great summers for our kids. And so it's just another lesson that we think we do, because we think we have to be the smartest one in the room, but we absolutely probably aren't, and we don't need to be.
I think you just made a lot of people on the webinar feel better. So thank you for that. Let's take a quick break and do our second poll question. So I believe I need to share my screen, but let's see if that's going to even work. So while I'm trying to make this come back to life, Jeff, if you could be preparing our next poll question. And sorry, give me 1 second. I've got something freezing up here. So we've got, have you already developed a plan for how you will return your employees to the workplace? Yes, no, or working on it. So fewer choices, but a more direct question. So let's hear what people have to say about that. Bill, any projections in this case?
I would say working on it.
I think that's probably a safe answer because I think everybody is still really juggling what exactly this is going to look like. In fact, people I've talked to don't know when they're coming back or what it's going to look like from day to day. Joe, what are your thoughts on this?
What the future is going to be?
Well, this question about have people developed a plan? Where do you think people are right now regarding that?
I would say people have a plan. The quality of the plan, the depth of the plan, that's more up in the air.
Maxine, I know you're the eternal optimist. How do you feel about the question?
Well, the companies that I'm working with on the board of Foot Locker and the board of Build-A-Bear, they both have a plan, and it's a pretty detailed plan, but it does vary by community because each state, each municipality, each mall owner has a different in and out. But there is a plan, and I think it's very adaptable to whatever the circumstances is. And I'm quite impressed with how detailed two separate companies without the same team have come up with a very similar strategy. And I think it makes me feel I can sleep at night knowing that.
Good. I think the results are coming up. Here we go. So no surprise, Bill, I think you nailed it. 70% say they're working on it. I think that's expected. 18% say they have their plan. Good for them. And 12% do not. So I think this is pretty much probably what was expected. I'm watching the clock, so let me just go around to each one of you, and I want to save time for that golden nugget in the end, but I'd like to ask each of you, and Bill, I'll start with you. What didn't I ask that I should have? What's something that you'd like to get into other than that last piece of wisdom?
I had another thing that we worked on diligently at May during the merger point of time, and that was to be advocates for our people to Macy's and to try to place the best executives that we had in the May Company with Macy's. And I would say that I think we were successful at that. And we had a couple of sit downs or more with the senior team at Macy's. And we picked our spots, and we were careful in our assessments to make sure that they were balanced, not only for each individual, but also balanced as a company. So didn't go in and try to say, we're going to try to place half of the population of May into Macy's, but we were more select, and it was successful. We didn't get everybody placed that we wished, and not everybody that Macy's wanted to hire was willing to change. But I think the May Company team, where we were good advocates for our people. And I think it's a worthwhile effort in tough times that we all need advocates to help us get through things.
Joe, how about you? What should I have asked that I didn't?
Well, I have an answer that had been searching for a question, so I'll use this. Let's say your question is, am I aware of anybody who's doing a really good job during this time? And my answer is, I'm on the board of St. Patrick's Center, the St. Louis agency, whose vision is to end homelessness in the St. Louis area. We just hired a young CEO, Anthony D'Agostino. And, you can't really work from home when you're homeless. And so the need is there. And Anthony, just new in the job, he started in January, and we're so impressed with the way he's just taken control of this. We have 100 and something employees. He's keeping them very well informed. We've got policies. We had a couple of positive tests, and so we had to shut down the building and clean it out. Fortunately, those two people are back at work. The culture is phenomenal. Our people are working with our clients. We took on, it would have been easy to just say, look, I'm new here. The city asked us to get involved over Little Sisters of the Poor, which is now called Sisters Mission. We have 3 floors over there. We're housing people there. I just so I'm very impressed with a leader rising to the occasion when I've seen people with much more experience and much more authority and much more complicated organizations just kind of freeze up and panic. He's done the opposite. He's kind of run into this building. And so I just wanted to give Anthony a shout out, and to all the charities that are really struggling right now. We just all have to do what we can to help. And Maxine, the work you're doing, it's phenomenal. I found people to be very generous during this time. But we have to ask because the need isn't diminished.
Good point. Maxine, do you have an answer seeking a question?
Kind of, because I think that one of the lessons that I've learned along the way is sometimes no can be yes. Like when the promotion you thought you were going to get, or you had this job, but you're graduating from college, and now that job's been delayed or taken away. I had a similar situation, and I think it sort of is a good example for people. In 2004, I was in Japan opening up a Build-A-Bear store, and I got a phone call from our PR department that said, Oprah just invited you to be on the show on Monday, and it was a Saturday. And I said, well, sorry, I can't be there. And they said, what? And I said, I can't be there. I'm opening a store here. I've got to stay here. The next call was from the producer, and could you be here on Tuesday? I said, no, I'm sorry, I can't. I have to be in Korea. We're opening our second store there. So the third call was from Oprah. And she said, Maxine, when can you be here? And it changed the whole story. And I ended up being able to be there by Thursday. And she had the time to turn the whole studio into a Build-A-Bear store. And you can imagine what that did for our business. Now, nobody usually says no to Oprah. I get that. But it was a really good lesson, because if I had been anywhere else easy to get there, I probably would have said yes. But I had a commitment and one I was looking forward to, an opening of the store. So it can actually turn out better than you could ever imagine. And I think that that's one of those things that you have to open up, you have to network, you have to talk to people. And as bad as it might seem right now, I think that there's better opportunities out there. You might have even been in a job you didn't really like that much. Yeah, it paid well and it was insurance. And you need to be sort of, thrown out of your seat in order to stand up and get up and go do your dream job. And I think that that's really a huge opportunity for everyone today to be thinking about, but you have to kind of know what that is. And it doesn't hurt to kind of think into yourself and say, okay, if I could pick my job, what would it be? And how do I go find it? And I think that's really where the talent, it's all about talent. It's really not about technology. And if you're doing something you love, you'll be doing it better than if a job that you didn't like. And so I think those opportunities are in front of us, as dim as it seems right now. I think they're out there. And remember that no can be a better yes.
Great, thank you. Well, I think we've done a nice job as far as filling the time. We're coming up near the end, so I would like to get to those golden nuggets that we promised, and I'll just keep with the same cadence. Bill, what's the one thing that everyone who hangs up today, if they remember nothing else, what's the one thing you'd like them to take away?
Be a beacon of hope. Treat all your people with dignity and respect.
Excellent, thank you. Joe?
People are resilient. They're thirsting for leadership, and with great leadership, they'll do remarkably wonderful things.
And Maxine?
I so much believe in collaboration. You don't have to have the answer. Somebody else might have it. And so my personal philosophy when we use it Build-A-Bear all the time is 1 + 1 can at least equal 10. And it's so much better when you're working together with others for a better future.
Very good. Well, one thing I want to do, because I don't want people to think that we ignored them, we had a lot of great questions in the chat room, tried to get to those that we could, but thank you very much for those who submitted a question that we may not have made it to. I want to thank the three of you. This was fantastic. Great stories, great experience that I think will help a lot of people. Had my slides worked, you would see that I wanted to share with people that our next webinar is Learning from a Crisis, and that is scheduled for 12:30 Central Time on May 13th. Our speakers will be two of our own. So Dr. Cheryl Throgmorton and Dr. David Rowan will be handling the duties for that session. So we invite everyone to attend that as well. Again, on behalf of myself and Psychological Associates and everyone I work with, really appreciate the time you've taken. You gave this a lot of thought, and I think it's going to help a lot of people. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.